Questions, any subject, or attempt to answer them, and any subject you'd like to speak to.
Senator, the House and the Senate announced special investigative committees to look into the Iran arms deal affair. What's your opinion on the special committees, and do you see that interfering with any investigation the Judiciary Committee?
I believe there should be a single committee of the United States Senate and one in the House. I think it's going to be too difficult to have a joint committee, which would be preferable, but I think there would be more difficulty in setting that up than it would be worth. But I think that the 6 committees in the Senate that have jurisdiction should be melded into one, and we should begin the investigation as rapidly as possible. I, for one, do not object to it being formed under the Republican leadership now, if they wish to do it. But I think practically speaking, that's not likely to happen because of time. And I'm not quite certain that the Republican leadership is all that crazy about wanting to do that either. So I think there should be one committee.
The Democrats, or the leaders announced today, I believe, that it will be a Democratic majority on both of those committees. And I was wondering what your chances are of serving on the Senate committee.
I hope not good. I shouldn't be so facetious. I have not sought, and I am not seeking membership on that committee. I have been told secondhand I've been recommended to be on the committee, but I'm going to have enough difficulty, as most chairpersons are in the upcoming Congress, dealing with the business of our committee. And I think, generally speaking, it would be better to have people who did not have full responsibility, committee responsibilities now, to make up the membership of that committee. There's plenty of qualified people. I would also like to add that I hope the President makes the need for the committee somewhat moot, and I think he could do that. I think the President would be very well served if he would go to the American people and the Congress and just straightforwardly and simply state what has happened to the extent that he knows it. To say what the rationale was for this proposal to sell arms, what the genesis of it was, who was involved in it, how it happened, and I believe he could avert what could develop into a crisis. I think he could allow us to get to the business of attending to very serious problems that we're going to have to address immediately upon returning to the Senate. For example, there were rumors as recently as 10 days ago that the administration would not be prepared to send forward their budget at the usual time of the State of the Union. It would not come until after the so-called President's holiday, which is the first week in February. Obviously, there's a great deal to be done on the economy. There's a great deal to be done on foreign policy. And I think the President should very bluntly take Chairman Lugar's advice and immediately fire Mr. Casey and Mr. Regan and get on with the business of conducting the government.
Why fire Casey and Regan?
There is no way Casey could not be involved in this. I admit a prejudice. I'm the only one that voted against Casey to begin with years ago. I think he should not be the Director of Central Intelligence. He does not have the confidence of the Congress in either political party. And I think it's important for the President to demonstrate that there is nothing being hidden and that he is prepared to start anew. And pick the new year to do that. I think that if Mr. Casey and Mr. Regan wish to serve him, and I'm not being facetious, the best way they could serve him would be to tender their resignations.
Do you believe then that Donald Regan knew what was happening fully?
I don't think it is particularly relevant whether he knew or he didn't. If he didn't know and it was a White House operation, then he's not very competent. If he did know and he didn't inform the President, then he does not serve the President well. And if he did know and he did tell the President, then we're all in trouble.
Vice President Bush has admitted that some mistakes were made. And some senators, Republican and Democrats, have said that if President Reagan admitted that mistakes were made, it would deflate the issues.
I think the American people want desperately to believe the President. I want to. We cannot tolerate another failed presidency. As much as I've disagreed with this President, and I'm not being disingenuous here, as much as I've disagreed with him, and there's probably been fewer people who have been more harsh critics of his foreign policy than I do not want to see him fail. Because if it does, it will make it incredibly difficult for the next president, Democrat or Republican, to conduct the affairs, particularly the foreign affairs of this country. And so I believe that if the president, with the reservoir of goodwill that he possesses in this country, came forward and simply said, in, if you will, the John Kennedy mold, and said, I not only take full responsibility, which he's already said, but that I was wrong, I made a mistake. I am cleaning house and I'm beginning anew. I think the American people would put this to bed immediately. It would be gone.
You think he will?
I hope he will. To tell you the truth, I've already lost my bet. I went on record in my home state saying that the next time the president went on the air, he would do that. He fooled me. He did not do that. I don't know where he's getting his advice. I don't know why he's doing what he's doing. For example, he said he has told his national security advisor and the assistant, Colonel North, to come forward and testify before the committee as if that was some great offering that was made. And then they came forward and took the Fifth Amendment. I just think this thing is, it can become very messy, and it need not become some Byzantine plot. The president can say to us, I started this on such and such a date. My rationale was such and such. This is what went awry. This is why I think I did, this is what I think I did correctly, this is what I think I did incorrectly, and here's what I'm going to do from here. And I cannot believe that his standing and his and the affection of the American people would not surround him and be able to allow him to have a productive 2 years, last 2 years of his presidency.
Wouldn't the Congress still want some blood from Poindexter or North?
The Congress would still want to know what the facts were on the record from the people who in fact participated. But I think that the nature of the investigation would be very different. If you notice, ladies and gentlemen, I haven't seen as many Republicans, and I've been a senator since 1972. I was there during Watergate in the United States Senate. I have not seen as many Republicans running for cover as I have seen since then. And the reason that's happening is that because there's not much information forthcoming, they're all in the position of saying, my God, I don't want to be out there saying, I know what he's saying is correct, and then find out that I have been duped too. And the president, if he would come forward and state the details, would gain himself some real allies in both political parties who would wish to help, which would change considerably the nature of and composition of the hearings that will take place, in my view.
But your statements imply that the president does know.
My statement, if that's what it implies, it's not meant to imply that. I do not believe, I take the president at his word, that he did not know. I accept him at his word. I think what the president seems to be doing is trying to get out of this without any damage, and consequently causing himself more damage. It is clear that the president was not fully in control of American foreign policy. And I think the president should acknowledge that, because the alternative to not acknowledging that is that he was in control and he did know. There is one of those two things. There is not an alternative. And that's what has most of us perplexed, that there is an unwillingness to say, we're not looking for a mea culpa to say, well, we got him to say he made a mistake. We're looking for to confirm that he didn't know. That's what we want to know.
What do you think this arms sale program has done to U.S. foreign policy?
I think it has reinforced an inclination that, and here I am the critic of the policy, it has reinforced an inclination that already existed among Europeans to be predisposed to the notion that this is a very naive administration without a very sound knowledge of American foreign policy. If you think about it, ladies and gentlemen of the press, here we had a president who took a major foreign policy initiative inside the White House, did not share it with the State Department, and had as the major architects of that policy 4 people who know nothing about foreign policy. No one ever accused Donald Reagan of knowing anything about foreign policy. No one ever suggested that Colonel North is an expert on foreign policy. No one ever said that Bud McFarlane, who's a fine, bright man who knows a lot about defense, knows anything about foreign policy. And everyone knows Admiral Poindexter has no background in foreign policy. So the only people who could be a part of the inside operation advising the president on what is a major foreign policy consideration were all people who have no background in foreign policy. And that's what is reinforced to the Europeans. And just as the Europeans, I've been chairman of the European Affairs Subcommittee for years, of the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm chairman of NATO's Committee on Nuclear Planning. I deal with these folks all the time. They believed Jimmy Carter was extremely naive in foreign policy. And now along comes Ronald Reagan, who they viewed as being naive, and this is an overwhelming confirmation. This plus Reykjavik, plus the Danloff swap, all adds up in the minds of Europeans to say we're not very sophisticated. It is not something, as has been written in my experience with the Europeans, and I've come to know the leaders of the parliamentary bodies of most of those countries and the leaders, the executives. It is not that they feel they've been duped. It is not that they are worried about duplicity. Europe thrives on duplicity. They don't think they are not punishing the president for that. What they look at and they say is, my God, what could ever make somebody think that selling, whether it's 30 million or 3 billion, that's been alleged, and there's been the differences, worth of sophisticated arms to the Iranians is going to end terrorism? Why would anyone believe that such a sale would in fact enhance stability? That's the part that I believe the Europeans are most chagrined about, not that there was a duplicity in our policy of saying, don't you do it and us doing it.
You're talking
Yes,
about
sir.
us.
If you were elected, how about some names of some people you would consider to surround yourself with as foreign policy advisors?
Well, first of all, I am not a candidate, but were I asked by the next president to recommend people to be surround them in the area of foreign policy, there are a number of extremely qualified people. One of which immediately comes to mind is the former number 2 man at the CIA, who has a great background in military affairs, but also a significant base of knowledge in foreign affairs. The former Admiral Bobby Inman is extremely qualified. There are a number of people, past Republicans as well as Democratic administrations. There are individuals who many of you would not know, nor would the American people know, who are extremely competent staff people who would make undersecretaries of states and do the job well. There are some really good people within the State Department who are capable of doing that. I would advise the next president to seek the counsel of George Shultz in determining who their nominee should be. I'm serious when I say that. So it's not that there aren't good people. It's that the president, let me say it slightly differently. The president's strongest admirers and most loyal supporters offered as evidence that foreign policy could be conducted well, notwithstanding the fact that President Reagan didn't claim any real knowledge in foreign policy, the following assertion. They always would say, he may not know a great deal about foreign policy, but he is a great administrator and he'll surround himself with people who do know. Well, he surrounded himself with people who don't know. Therein lies the problem. Weren't you all, a rhetorically asked question here, weren't you all somewhat surprised that Secretary of State Shultz was not in on this process? I mean, it's a serious mistake, one that can be overcome, one that the president can rectify, and he's gone a long way in doing it by nominating Mr. Carlucci, who is extremely qualified person to conduct not only to oversee the White House input on American foreign policy, but also defense policy as well as covert actions. Extremely qualified man.
You said you were not a candidate. Does that mean you're not a candidate at this moment, or you will not be a candidate for the 88 election at all?
It means I'm not a candidate for this at this moment.
No William Sherman.
No William Sherman.
How do you think this affects the chances of a Democratic president the next time around?
It depends on how it plays out, and quite frankly, it depends upon how well the Democrats conduct themselves in the process. But I would have to bluntly state it probably enhances the chances of a Democrat being elected president and diminishes the chances of a Democrat being able to be an effective president. Because I think the presidency will be damaged in the process if this thing is allowed to linger and fester. One of the things I think will happen is the reason why I believe it will enhance the chances of a Democrat being president does not relate specifically to the issue. What has happened here, in a sense, is it's like the little boy pointing and saying the emperor has no clothes. It's become clear to the American people that the conduct of foreign policy is not in the hands they thought it was in, regardless of the merits of the operation. And I think this is going to force the American people to look at other assertions that have been made, such as whether or not this president has anything to do with the deficit, whether or not the economy is really as healthy and rosy as the president asserts it is, whether or not his policies with regard to other economic activities are as sound as they were prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt as being. I think all of that now gets put into question in a way that it was not put in question prior to this crisis in confidence that it hopefully temporarily, but potentially longer run could be inflicted upon this presidency. Pat Moynihan, in his usual flamboyant way, said it well. I'm paraphrasing. He said something to the effect, "Mr. President, sir, your presidency is teetering on the brink of disaster." And it is.
If the president lays out the facts, and if those facts show that the president knew or condoned breaking the law, should the American people then be satisfied with an admission, or should there be more?
I think the president and the American people would be satisfied with an admission. And I think there would be more and should be more from the Congress in terms of seeing to it that future presidents are not able to violate the law with impunity, assuming they're popular.
What does that mean?
Well, what it means is I think you will find much tougher legislation. There are those of us who've been trying to, Senator Pell and I and a young congressman from Southern California introduced an arms export control bill that is much tougher and much tighter 6 months ago. You'll find legislation like that passing. You will find the oversight procedure being tightened up once again. I blame part of this upon the notion that was adopted when the president took office by some of his supporters in the Congress, which said basically that we in the oversight committees, the intelligence committees, should not have to know everything. There is no evidence that there have been any major leaks from the intelligence committees. The leaks usually come from the White House and the Defense Department. And this notion that we somehow had to stop hamstringing the president by asking him what he was doing, even though it was kept fully in secret, is one that I think has damaged, not helped, the presidency. And I think if the president knew he had to be more answerable, and if future presidents knew they had to be more answerable for their conduct in advance, they would be less likely to go off on frolics like the one that apparently somebody went off on.
I think we're going to have to conclude this because we need a little break here before you go out
One
on
quick
stage.
question.
Sure.
The president is supposed to announce tomorrow whether he's going to call a special session of Congress. Would you support doing that, or do you think that would be overplaying?
I think it's a little bit of an overplay, but I would leave the call to the president. I would hope that the president, what I would love to see, if the president would accompany a call for a special session with much greater elaboration on what took place, I think we'd all be well served by the process. The notion, see, I am not very, to use the slang, hung up on who runs the committees and whether there are more Democrats or more Republicans on the committee for a simple reason, that there is no way an investigation of this magnitude can be staffed, undertaken, and completed before the next Congress is in session. So it doesn't matter. I'm prepared to go back now, begin the process. If the President can give us additional information to speed the process and get us underway, allowing the next Congress, which by law would be required to fulfill the job, to finish the job, all the better. But it will not be much good, in my view, if the President merely calls a special session and says, I have no more to say. Let the chips fall where they may. How can you do that? How can you say, let the chips fall where they may, without giving more information? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Biden. You've been most generous.
Oh, no, I'm flattered.